I'm Lee Moore,
I'm Rob Moore.
and this is the Chinese Literature Podcast. Rob, today we are uh, we are both working mobily.
From our underground bunkers.
That's right.
The Chinese podcasting bunkers. Yeah. We have ventilators and plastic suits and hazmat containers and all that stuff.
Governor Kate Brown has mandated that social distancing should happen here in Oregon. I'm sure many of our listeners are also facing similar situations.
Yep. And probably lockdown. Now, fortunately for you, you will have this podcast to entertain and educate you. I'm sure you've been dying for another one of these.
So a lot of people don't know how we do the podcast, but I guess I should point out that so we're recording right now in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. But Rob, although we have been putting out podcasts for the last few months, you and I didn't see each other until February, right?
Right, because I was in China.
Yeah, and so you escaped from China. You may have brought
It's
the
my
coronavirus.
fault. The whole thing is my fault. Totally my fault. My family was riddled with disease, and we walked through the airport anyway. We were like, we don't care. I'm kidding, of course. We went through self-quarantine here for 2 weeks, and everything was fine. No temperature fluctuations. It's funny because so many people we meet are like, oh, wow. So it's kind of like out of the frying pan into the fire, huh? And we're like, yeah, no, not even close. Tianjin, right before we left, was getting dodgy, like pretty scary, actually. Not from the number of cases, just the everything, man. You couldn't even go out of your apartment basically anymore. There was like one shop open in the whole district. It was really creepy.
That was
Here,
the people's war on coronavirus, right?
yeah, that was the People's War. Absolutely. They were waging a good one. Although, to their credit, the number of cases in Tianjin, the city where we were, I think they peaked at like 150 or something and then started to go down. In a city of 15 million, we thought at the time it was kind of ridiculous. Now looking back, I'm like, well, I don't know. They seem to have gotten rid of it pretty well.
Well, Rob, while you sympathize with totalitarianism, should we go ahead and turn to today's special coronavirus themed topic?
We should. And in fact, this comes courtesy of my wife, who took a picture of, there's propaganda posters all over China for this and that. But as you can imagine, there's tons dealing with the coronavirus. And one of the interesting ones she took a picture of is a rewriting of the Confucian classic, the San Zi Jing, the 3-character classic, with coronavirus advice instead of the actual San Zi Jing.
So we did a podcast several years ago, I think, on the original San Zi Jing, which is it's essentially taking the essence of the Confucian classics and diluting them down to 3-character phrases which a child could understand. They're kind of rhythmic in the way they work. I forget how long it is, but it's one of those things that, like, it in a lot of ways, back in pre-modern China, it was one of the first texts that male children were introduced to teach them and kind of get them on the road to preparing to memorize the Confucian classics and sit for the imperial exams. This was the first step. This was kind of like preschool in terms of Confucian.
This is sort of like Confucianism for dummies, or for kids.
Well, it's not for dummies. It's for kids, right? Like, it's not, it is talking down to them some, but it's also, there are elements of philosophy in the original San Zi Jing that are prominent throughout. It's not just kind of instructions, do this, do that, but the very first line, the famous line, is 人之初心本善. So in the beginning of people, something like, in the beginning, people were originally good.
If you like, at the beginning, people's natures are good, basically good. So when you're born good. That's a basic tenet.
And that's very much, this is an oversimplification, but that's okay, because the San Zi Jing is an oversimplification.
Yes, absolutely.
It's very much, that's the key, that's kind of the core of Mencius's philosophy, which is really what the San Zi Jing is all about. We've talked a little bit about Confucianism, but Confucius actually, what you have is kind of a fortune cookie size snippets from what a man named Confucius or Kongzi might have said, Master
Right.
Kong, and those have been written down by his disciples and then reinterpreted. And what we get is like a reinterpretation of a reinterpretation of a reinterpretation of the
Sure.
original.
Yeah.
So Confucius never, as far as we don't really know about the sort of written history of the documents in Confucius. There are claims that he may have edited some of the documents, but most scholars do not think that Confucius wrote the Analects. It was probably written by a disciple. So we have these words of his disciples, and then a generation or two later, you have two interpretations of Confucius facing off. One is Mencius or Mengzi, who says that all people are good, and one is Shunzi, who says that all people are originally bad. And both of them say it's only through education that you can modify human nature. But Mencius says people are taught to be bad, and we use education to try and prevent that. So orthodox education prevents us being in this world, being corrupted by this world. Whereas Shunzi says, no, people are originally bad, and they are made good through the process of education. So those are the two competing philosophies. Mencius becomes orthodox, and that's what becomes kind of baked into the original San Zi Jing.
And this is, it's an interesting segue then, because the propaganda posters that you see up now, where they have the San Zi Jing, and it's in quotes, it even says like basically like the fever or coronavirus. They don't say coronavirus in Chinese, but that's the essence of it. "Quote unquote San Zi Jing," right? So this is a clear reference to it. But the advice portions of the original San Zi Jing work the way they do because philosophically the assumption is you're all born able to be good people, and all you need is a push, and this is the push, right? And the propaganda posters are essentially assuming, look, all of you want to work together to fight this thing. That's why we're going to tell you what to do, right? And so there was a lot of variety in the original San Zi Jing. You'd have a couple of 3-character portions that have a philosophical statement followed by advice or a warning. This one, though, the propaganda poster up now, all the 3-character portions are just, well, you could see them as suggestions or orders, probably orders, right? So wear your mask, protect your health.
Don't go outside much.
Right. Let me see what else is up here.
Like, can I just read some of it for you? We're going to put this on the website, but I just want to read some of it. 戴口罩张卫生勒小度要理征自体温类洗手畅通风健康有 So wear your face mask, think or talk about hygiene.
How you're feeling, your health, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Struggle to or strongly try and destroy the virus. You have to have strength.
Check your temperature, wash your hands.
Strongly wash your hands. Like
strongly wash your hands.
Got an element of struggle to it. Make sure to have help. Something like that. That's just kind of our on the fly translation, but it's very much kind of, we were talking about authoritarianism, totalitarianism. I used the term totalitarianism earlier, but authoritarianism is more accurate,
right?
In the description of China. But this is very much. It feels like an authoritarianist document because instead of trying to convince you, there's no sort of rhetorical flourish. There's no sort of like persuasion. It's all about do this, do this, do this. It has this propagandistic element.
Sure. And what's interesting though about it is why it even needs to have why it needs to be composed as a quote unquote San Zi Jing, because the original San Zi Jing is clearly not this kind of thing. In fact, its advice only works because people are told philosophically that they are something that maybe they don't think they are, right? Here, that's in some ways not necessary because we all know that there's a virus. We all know there's a lockdown. We all know there's a problem. So there's no real need to ground it in anything. But if that's the case, why does there even need to be a San Zi Jing? But that there's a reference to the classics here is still very important, right? Because it's not just a piece of propaganda, right? It's rooted in something deeper, something longer. That's the implication anyway, that the people drafting this didn't just put up a poster saying, go wash your hands. They're people who've read widely and in that sense should also be trusted because, this is a part of the tradition even.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons, so two reasons I have why it's necessary to turn the coronavirus warnings into San Zi Jing. One, it's very memorable and it's easy for a child to remember. And if
Very
you're trying
true.
to get
Yeah.
children to remember it, I think it's a fairly effective way. So that's just kind of the practical Lee speaking. The skeptical Lee I would suggest the only legitimizing force for the regime in Beijing has increasingly become nationalism, and nationalism grounded in this sense that China has this incredibly long history, and that's the wealth of the nation, this long history, and everything kind of has to reference that. So I think that this kind of having health advice turned into this fairly old children's classic strikes me as just a natural or an inevitable result of what would happen if you had a nationalist regime that was grounding its legitimacy in nationalism.
Yeah, well, and here's the other interesting part of that nationalism argument is it references also how the party interprets Confucius, because did you ever watch the Chow Yun-fat film Kongzi Confucius?
No.
Yeah, it was pretty bad, but one of the reasons it was so weird, and I watched it in China with a friend of mine, is that it's the entire thing presents Confucius entirely as a good and loyal servant of the state. Nothing else. There's nothing else. He's a good servant of the state. And even the idea that you have Confucius institutes, right? They're referencing the nationalist sort of cultural hero Confucius, but the sayings of Confucius can often be critical of the government if in fact it has forgotten what it's supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah, and Confucius originally was quite critical of the state, and he never really found a home within the state. That's part of
He
the
wandered
interesting.
From place to place. Obviously, if he was a good servant of the state, he would probably not have needed to wander, but he did.
Yeah, the current manifestation of Confucianism very much makes him into this figure like building up the government, but he was not that.
No, and in fact, this propaganda poster I think is a great example of how Confucius is read. Confucius is read as someone who gives commands. This is what you must do. Do this, do this, do this. There's no rhetoric. There's no attempt to persuade, because if you're a good servant of the state, you work in terms of commands. The state does, and you obey, right? They say it, you jump. And here we have an example of that, right? So Confucius says, go wash your freaking hands, check your temperature, and don't meet in groups. End of discussion, right? But if this had been the original San Zi Jing, you would have had a lot of excursions into what it means to have a healthy society, both physically and spiritually. There would have been an element of persuasion, and there's not here, which I think is indicative of how the party reads Confucius.
I'm reading Frank Dicketer's Cultural Revolution, a People's History right now. And there's a part of it where he talks about how during the 1960s, after the Great Leap Forward had completely failed, Mao was concerned by the revival of feudalism quote unquote feudalism. And one of the elements that he was concerned about is that increasingly children were having, schools were using the San Zi Jing to teach them, and that actually caused this revival, or it kind of kicked off some of the very first steps of the Great Proletariat Revolution, the Wenhua Dageming, which began. Didn't officially begin until 1966, but Mao was kind of cooking it up. So it's interesting that the San Zi Jing is kind of creating this concern, but also creating this concern in Mao's mind. But it's also interesting because one of the things that he cooked up, or that was cooked up to respond to this threat of traditional Chinese Confucian I don't want to call it propaganda, but kind of rhetorical devices for children, is that they tried to create communist heroes, one of which was Lei Feng. And we've talked about Lei Feng in other podcasts. Lei Feng is interesting because he's kind of the emblem of Maoism for the common man. All he does is take orders. You give him an order, he does it really well. He does it even better than you asked him because he's really good at taking orders. Lei Feng is the ideal citizen in terms of how Mao wants the citizen to be. So it's interesting that the San Zi Jing actually in the 1960s was considered kind of it was considered counter-revolutionary, not kind of counter-revolutionary. It was considered counter-revolutionary, but the party today has taken the San Zi Jing in terms of its form and reimagined it in this very much propagandistic, you will take orders manner that is very similar to the way it did Lei Feng.
Right, and it's interesting too because you can ask the question, which destroys a great figure's presence in a culture more, to just say no, you can't read him anymore, or to completely repackage him in a way that makes him basically not who he is anymore. And in this case, you have the Confucius of the San Zi Jing giving everyone health advice. I mean, it's such an interesting way to do it because I can't. It would be like taking, I don't know, well-known passages of poetry in the Western tradition and making them all about like driving instructions or something. And the fact that that would even work in the first place is fascinating, right? But the idea that, Confucius exists to give us all advice and that's all, is kind of insidious because
he rather than actually to give orders here, right?
Not even advice. Yeah, you're right. Orders. So the tradition, the philosophical tradition of the country actually boils down to this. It's really is fascinating, and it's possible it could be working really well. The people are walking past these propaganda posters, and it just gets stuck in your head. Da 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 da. You know.
If I could make another metaphor, it's almost like a virus that burrows into a cell and repurposes the cell, leaving the form of the cell to do it, to help it, and repurposes the cell to feed the virus.
Right.
Since this is a COVID-19,
I was about to say, bringing it full circle back to the virus theme. Well done. Well done. Well, that's about all I've got for it. Did you have some other thoughts you wanted to share?
No, I think this is a fascinating look at how literature in the PRC is repurposed for contemporary concerns. It speaks to the question of whether or not literature, like the line between literature and propaganda, if that is something that if we can actually draw a line between them. Yeah, I think this is a fascinating thing. I'm looking forward to getting it up on the website. Take a look at it while you're sitting there in your home, hopefully staying safe.
Yep. And if you're, since we're stuck at home a lot more, shoot us an email, shoot us a review online. Let's keep in touch a little bit. And if you've got stuff you'd like to say about this or questions, send us an email. If you haven't before, this would be a good time to start.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm Lee Moore,
I'm Rob Moore.
and this is the Chinese Literature Podcast.